My wife punched my pregnant sister in the stomach, and thank God she did. My wife walked up to my 7-month pregnant sister during her gender reveal party and punched her full force in the stomach. My sister folded in half and slammed backward into the dessert table while 60 guests screamed. I grabbed my wife by the arm, yelling, "Have you lost your mind?" while my mom was already dialing 911 and sobbing that someone had just assaulted a pregnant woman. My father and my cousins dragged my wife toward the fence, and I got in her face, calling her sick and jealous, while my sister lay in the smashed cake holding her belly and screaming that she felt something tear inside her. Her fiancé was on his knees checking her for blood, and half the party had their phones out filming while my grandfather clutched his arm and went gray in a lawn chair. My aunts scooped up their toddlers and ran for their cars while I dropped down next to my sister trying to feel for a kick, but she kept shoving my hands off her stomach and whispering, don't touch it. It hurts too much." Our neighbor, who delivered babies for a living, tried to kneel down to help, and my sister curled into a tight ball and shrieked at her to get away from her stomach. My uncle was pacing with his lawyer on speaker saying we needed to press charges for assault on an unborn child, while my sister's future mother-in-law went white and had to be walked inside and laid on the couch. My sister kept both arms clamped around her middle so hard that nobody could get a hand near her, crying over and over that she could feel something was wrong with the baby. "Peel her dress back and look at where I hit her," my wife said, not yelling now, just standing there breathing hard while my father pinned her wrists, and I wanted to put my fist through her face until I actually looked. There was a deep dent pressed into the side of my sister's belly, and it was not popping back out. "That is silicone under her dress," my wife said. "That is not a baby, and I can prove every single thing she has been doing." I got to my sister before she could roll away and pressed my hand flat against the dent. My fingers went numb, feeling the seams of the shell and the Velcro straps and the cool foam padding where my niece was supposed to be. She has been buying prosthetic pregnancy bellies online in every size to fake the months going by, stealing ultrasound scans off pregnancy forums and dropping her own name onto them, and collecting almost $40,000 from this family for prenatal bills and specialist visits that never happened because my wife called every OB in this county and not one of them had ever heard of her. I kept pressing on the dented foam while my sister thrashed and tried to pin my wrist, and then my mom reached in too and felt the strap and screamed, and suddenly everyone was grabbing at my sister's stomach and finding more buckles and more padding underneath. My wife had followed her 3 days earlier when my sister said she had a growth scan, and instead my sister sat in a sports bar and drank 2 glasses of wine for an hour and a half, then drove to a costume warehouse and bought 2 more bellies a size bigger. My sister was screaming at my wife to shut her lying mouth, but my wife did not stop. My grandfather looked like he was going to slide out of the lawn chair. My wife held up my sister's tablet that she had left charging at our house last weekend. The browser was open to pages of realistic silicone maternity bellies and how to fake nausea on a schedule and pregnancy symptoms week by week, and what to say when guests ask to feel the baby move. "But here is why I could not wait one more day," my wife said, her voice shaking as my father kept hold of her arms. "I saw her at County General last week following a teenage girl around the maternity floor, and the visitor logs show she has been signing into the Young Mothers Support Group as a fake name for the last 2 months. My mother was sobbing while my wife showed everyone the photos she had taken through the cafeteria window. My sister sitting 1 seat away from a girl who was clearly all alone. My sister walking that girl to the bus stop. My sister carrying that girl's tray. She got close to a girl who has nobody in the world. She found out the girl is being induced tomorrow at 5 in the morning, and this week my sister bought a car seat and a set of nurse scrubs and printed out the shift change schedule for the maternity ward so she would know the exact window when the nurses swap over. My sister had been telling us for months she was delivering at a private birth suite 2 towns over that does not exist. She was going to vanish tonight and come back tomorrow afternoon holding a stolen newborn and telling us she had given birth. She had already been practicing forging hospital discharge papers and had bought a breast pump and cans of formula so feeding a stolen baby would look real to us. On top of that, she had been taking hormones to make her own body produce milk. The prosthetic belly had slid completely around to her hip by now, and my mom yanked the hem of my sister's dress up in front of everyone, exposing the whole rig strapped and buckled around her waist. Guests were shrieking, and my sister's fiancé backed straight into the fence, staring at the thing like his brain had stopped working. My cousin was on the phone with the police reporting the fraud and the planned kidnapping, while my aunt stood in a knot trying to add up how much cash each of them had handed my sister for fake medical bills. "You have ruined everything," my sister snarled at my wife, tearing the belly off her waist and throwing it down onto the grass. "That girl is a foster reject who will have that baby taken by the state inside a year anyway, and I would have given it a perfect life." She turned for the side gate, but my father and my cousins closed ranks and blocked her. I stood there watching my sister's face turn into something I had never seen in the 32 years I had known her, like a mask coming loose at the edges, and none of us understood yet how far she was already willing to go. She broke my father's grip and threw herself straight at my wife with her nails out. My cousins caught her in the air and put her down hard on the lawn. She was kicking and screaming that we had wrecked the only plan that mattered while the fake belly lay in the grass glass folded and dented. My wife kept shouting for everyone to stop and look at the hospital photos while my sister writhed under my cousin's. The sirens were already close because my cousin had called 5 minutes ago. My sister's fiancé just stood frozen against the fence, staring at the prosthetic like it might explain itself. 2 patrol cars pulled up onto the lawn, and officers came through the side gate while my sister tried to crawl toward the back of the yard. My cousin met them holding up her phone with the photos and the purchase confirmations my wife had forwarded. The officers looked at the belly on the grass and then at my sister still fighting my cousins, and they pulled their cuffs and she started shrieking that the girl did not deserve a baby anyway. She kept flipping between sobbing that we had betrayed her and hissing about what she would do to all of us when she got out. The officers read her rights while walking her to the car as the neighbors lined the sidewalk to watch. My grandfather was gripping his chest in the lawn chair, while my aunts fanned him with paper plates from the food table. The detective who arrived said they needed to reach the hospital right now about the teenage patient. My wife gave them the girl's name, Nadia Vela, and they radioed it in on the spot to get her protected. Within the hour, the hospital had moved Nadia to a secured floor with an officer outside her door. A judge signed an emergency protective order that same night to keep my sister away from her. The detective said the photos showed my sister had been circling this girl for 2 solid months. And then a second officer walked up to my wife and told her she was under arrest for assault. Everyone in the yard started yelling that she had just stopped a baby from being stolen, but the officer said an assault is an assault no matter the reason. My wife put her hands behind her back while I stood there useless trying to figure out where our checkbook even was. She spent that whole night in a holding cell while I called every attorney in my phone. Nobody would touch a case this strange until I found one at 4 in the morning who agreed to meet us at the courthouse. I never slept and I drove down at 6 with $6,000 in cash for bail. The lawyer read through the photos and the receipts and said my wife had almost certainly saved that baby, but that an assault charge was still an assault charge and she would face something. While we were still at the courthouse, my sister's fiancé showed up at our front door completely destroyed. He kept asking me how long she had been lying to him because he had spent last month painting the whole nursery a soft green. He had told his entire family they were expecting and put a $2,500 crib on his credit card. I showed him the tablet with a search history that ran back more than a year of fake pregnancy research. He got sick in our bathroom when he scrolled to the part about hormones to make her breasts leak so the lie would hold up in front of him. My mom called me crying because Channel 9 had already run the story about a planned baby snatching at a gender reveal. Our family name was on the late news and she could not step onto her porch without a reporter shouting a question. The girl at the pharmacy counter asked her straight out if she was the mother of the woman who tried to steal a baby. My dad had to take leave from the plant because his crew kept going silent whenever he walked past. The detective asked me to come along when they searched my sister's apartment for more evidence. We found 4 notebooks filled with details about Nadia Vela and her exact routine at the hospital. My sister had written down what Nadia ate at every meal and which restroom on which floor she used the most. There were long lens photos of Nadia walking to the bus that my sister had taken from across the parking structure. She had studied this girl for months the way you would study a target before an operation. The detective pulled out receipts for the nurse scrubs and a laminated fake hospital badge she had ordered from overseas. While we were searching, I found statements from 3 credit cards opened in my name that I had never once seen. My sister had used my social security number to open them and run everyone to the limit. She had done the exact same thing to our mother for another $25,000 in charges. The detective said identity theft would be stacked onto everything else she was already facing. I spent that whole week filing police reports and freezing my credit while the rest of my life kept falling apart around me. 3 days later, Nadia Vela went into labor and delivered a healthy baby boy under guard. Officers stayed outside her door the entire time, and a social worker named Yolanda Wells was in the room with her. My sister had been right about exactly one thing, that Nadia had no family in the world, but now she had Yolanda helping her file for housing and teaching her how to hold and feed her son. There is something that still crawls under my skin about how organized my sister was. 4 notebooks logging a stranger girl's bathroom habits and lunch trays. It makes me wonder what else was in that apartment that they have not connected yet. The baby was safe and my sister was in a cell where she could not reach anyone. We thought that was the end of it, but my sister's public defender said she wanted to take it all the way to trial. She was planning to stand up and argue she had been performing a public service by rescuing an infant from an unfit teenager. The prosecutor came to my parents' house 2 days later with a stack of paper as thick as a phone book. She laid the charges out one at a time across my mom's kitchen table. Conspiracy to kidnap a minor's child carried the most years by far, then fraud, then aggravated identity theft, then stalking, each one adding more time. My wife sat across from her with a much thinner folder for the assault charge. Our lawyer kept telling us it was the best result we could hope for, given that my wife had thrown a punch on video in front of 60 people. The prosecutor agreed to drop it to a misdemeanor if my wife pleaded guilty and accepted whatever the judge handed down. My dad called me that same night from the emergency room because his chest was tight and he could not catch his breath. The doctor called it a minor cardiac event brought on by stress, uterus and kept him overnight for monitoring. He kept asking the nurses how a father could miss every sign that his own daughter was capable of this. My mom sat by the bed holding his hand while the monitors beeped in the dark. My sister's fiancé called me the next morning and asked if I could come by their apartment. He had been boxing up her things and found 3 more prosthetic bellies stacked in the back of the closet. They were labeled in her handwriting, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, so she could rotate them as the lie aged. The receipts showed she had been collecting them for well over a year, learning how to wear each one. He showed me videos on an old phone of her practicing different walks and different ways to lower herself into a chair in front of the bathroom mirror. There were sticky notes stuck to the glass about which sweaters best hid the straps and how to sit so the fake bump looked natural on camera. My grandmother had shut herself in her bedroom for 3 days and would not answer the door. My mom finally used the spare key and found her sitting in the dark just staring at the wall. She had given my sister $6,000 for prenatal vitamins and maternity clothes over the last few months. The shame of being played by her own granddaughter was eating her alive from the inside out. Our lawyer called with more of what he had turned up, digging through my sister's online life. She had joined 14 different pregnancy forums under fake names over the past 2 years. Each account had lifted real ultrasound photos from actual pregnant women and edited her own details onto them. She had copied other women's birth stories word for word and reposted them as her own. The lawyer printed hundreds of pages, showing how carefully she had studied real pregnancies to make her performance flawless. 2 weeks later, my wife stood in front of the judge and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. The judge looked over all the evidence about why she threw the punch, but said that violence is never the answer no matter what the truth turns out to be. She sentenced my wife to weekly anger management for 6 months and 100 hours of community service. My wife signed the paperwork without a word of argument because she knew how close she had come to a cell of her own. I went back to the courthouse 3 weeks after that for a hearing on my sister's case. Nadia was there too, with her newborn son asleep in a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked impossibly young sitting on that bench, maybe 17, with dark rings under her eyes. When she saw me, she came over and thanked me for helping stop my sister from stealing her baby. Her voice shook when she talked about how frightened she was to testify, but she said she wanted the truth on record. The baby made small sounds and she tucked the blanket around his face with careful hands. I understood exactly why my sister had picked her, because she was completely alone in a room full of families. But she had Yolanda Wells now, the caseworker assigned to walk her through being a mother. The psychiatric report on my sister came in the mail 2 days before her next hearing. It said she had a delusional disorder centered on pregnancy, combined with strong antisocial traits. The doctor wrote that my sister truly believed she deserved a child more than the mothers she considered unworthy. She saw teenagers and women in recovery as people who did not deserve to keep their own children. The report ran 22 pages on how her mind had talked itself into planning to take Nadia's son. It made me physically sick to read how she had convinced herself she was the hero of the story. My parents hired a financial advisor to work out how much my sister had drained from the whole family. The total came to just over $55,000 once they added up every fraudulent charge. They started selling furniture and pulling from their retirement to pay back the relatives she had scammed. My dad could not meet anyone's eyes at dinner and kept apologizing for raising a person who could do this. The shame was hurting him worse than the heart trouble because he felt like he should have caught it. 3 weeks after the arrest, my sister sent me a letter from jail on yellow legal paper. She wrote that I had betrayed her and that she would never forgive me for wrecking her one shot at happiness. The whole page blamed everyone but herself for not understanding that Nadia did not deserve that baby. She wrote that girls who get pregnant that young are selfish and reckless and have no business raising anyone. She said she would have given the boy a perfect home with money and a yard and 2 parents. The last line said she had done the right thing, and the rest of us were too stupid to see it. I dropped the letter in the trash and tried to forget it, but 2 days later my wife had to report for her community service at a youth center downtown. The judge had assigned her 100 hours running a program that taught kids how to handle their anger, which felt strange given that she had thrown the punch that started all this. She walked into the first session with a dozen middle schoolers staring at her and told them the entire story of the gender reveal. The kids sat there with their mouths hanging open while she explained how she had followed my sister and uncovered the plan to take a baby. She showed them that anger can push you to protect someone, but that using your fists always carries a cost even when you turn out to be right. One boy asked if she regretted hitting my sister, and my wife said no about stopping the crime, but yes about the way she stopped it. The program director watched from the back of the room and nodded when my wife talked about finding better ways to handle a dangerous moment. After a few weeks, the kids started opening up about their own homes, and my wife turned out to be genuinely good at reaching them. Then Nadia called me crying because a man had shown up at her building claiming to be her older brother. She said his name was Ronnie, that he had disappeared 4 years ago into drugs, and that he had seen the news story about my sister and come looking for her. He stood outside her door with flowers and a stuffed bear for the baby, saying he wanted to make things right. Nadia did not trust him at first, but Yolanda ran a background check and found he had been clean and working for 2 years. Ronnie Ronnie had a warehouse job and his own place, and he kept coming back with diapers and formula until Nadia finally let him hold his nephew. Meanwhile, our whole family started going to therapy together, everyone except my sister, who was still locked up. The therapist made us sit in a circle and talk about being betrayed by someone we had loved our entire lives. My mom cried through every session about the warning signs she had waved away, and my dad kept blaming himself for how she turned out. The therapist kept telling us we were all victims of a manipulator and that we should stop blaming ourselves. She said people with my sister's condition become experts at hiding who they really are and fooling everyone close to them. We spent 6 weeks just absorbing the shock that someone we loved could plan something this cruel. Then my sister's fiancé filed a civil suit against her for fraud and emotional distress. His attorney sent us documents showing she had used hormones to make her body leak milk and fake mood swings around him. She had spent $9,000 of his money on baby gear and made him announce the pregnancy to his whole family. He wanted damages for the therapy he now needed and the money he had sunk into a child that never existed. His lawyer said the case was airtight because my sister had already bragged on recorded jail calls that she had faked all of it. 2 months after the arrest, I had to testify in front of a grand jury. They made me tell the whole story from the first punch while 23 strangers watched me. When I got to the part about feeling the dent buckle under my hand, I started shaking and had to stop for water. The prosecutor laid out photos of the prosthetic and receipts for every size my sister had ordered. I testified for 3 hours about everything I had seen and heard that afternoon and how her face had changed when we cornered her. The grand jury took under an hour to indict her on all counts, including conspiracy to kidnap and aggravated fraud. Meanwhile, Yolanda kept working with Nadia to get her footing under her. She helped her fill out housing applications and enrolled her in a job training track at the community college. Nadia wanted to become a surgical tech so she could support her son without ever depending on anyone. Yolanda drove her to sign up for formula assistance and helped her apply for subsidized childcare so she could sit in class. Ronnie started minding the baby while Nadia went to appointments, and slowly the two of them built something back. But things at home got heavier because I could not stop replaying my wife hitting my sister. Even knowing she had saved that boy, I kept seeing her wind back her arm and drive her fist into a pregnant stomach. We would be halfway through dinner, and I would hear the sound of it and put my fork down. I keep trying to understand how a mind arranges itself this way. She took hormones to make her own body produce milk for a child she was going to steal. That mix of cold planning and total delusion is something I still cannot fit together. My wife noticed me flinching whenever she moved too fast, and finally said out loud that we needed help. We found a couples counselor who worked with trauma and started going every week to untangle it. The counselor said my mind was stuck between gratitude and horror, which she said was a normal place to be stuck after something like this. Then the news coverage shook loose more people we had never heard about. 4 different women contacted the prosecutor to say my sister had stalked them during their own pregnancies. One woman said my sister had shown up at her prenatal appointments asking strange, specific questions about the baby's due date. Another said my sister had followed her out to a parking garage after a birthing class and tried to get her home address. A third had screenshots of my sister joining her private pregnancy group under a fake profile and asking exactly when she was due. The 4th woman was the one that stopped me cold because she said my sister had sat beside her at a car dealership 8 months ago, pretending to be pregnant with twins, and had asked which hospital she planned to deliver at and whether her husband traveled for work. The detective pulled the dealership footage, and there she was, a smaller belly under a winter coat, chatting with a stranger like an old friend. That was when they realized the gender reveal had not been her first attempt, only the closest she had ever come. The detective went back through my sister's accounts and found a storage unit she had rented under one of her fake names on the far side of town. Inside were 2 more prosthetic bellies, a folding bassinet still in the box, a diaper bag already packed with newborn clothes in 3 sizes, and a plastic tote of documents. The tote held blank birth certificate templates, a printed floor map of County General with the nursery, and the 2 stairwells circled in red pen, and a spiral notebook listing the names and shift patterns of 4 night nurses. There was a second phone in the unit, a cheap prepaid one, and when the detective got into it, he found messages my sister had been sending to other women in those pregnancy forums, coaching them on how to fake symptoms and where to buy the most convincing bellies, like she had turned her sickness into a service she offered strangers. One woman on that phone had asked my sister point blank how far she was willing to go, and my sister had written back that a baby raised by the wrong person was not really that baby's life anyway. I read that line 3 times and still could not make it sit still in my head. I keep coming back to the storage unit, the bassinet already assembled in the dark, the diaper bag zipped and waiting by the door. She had not been dreaming about a baby. She had been keeping a nursery on standby, ready to be filled the day she found the right girl. The detective said units like that are usually rented within a mile of where a person actually intends to run, and Nadia's building was less than a mile away. My uncle hired his own attorney to file a separate civil suit to claw back the money my sister had taken from him. The lawyer said criminal restitution could take years, but that civil court might move faster with clean evidence. He started gathering receipts and bank bank records from every relative who had handed my sister cash for bills that did not exist. The total kept climbing as more of the family remembered writing her checks for prescriptions and appointments. Then, my sister did something none of us expected and fired her public defender in open court. She stood and told the judge she wanted to represent herself because everyone in the building was against her. She said her attorney was part of a plot to make her look insane when she had only been trying to save a baby. The judge ordered a second psychiatric evaluation to decide whether she was competent to make that choice. The psychiatrist spent 5 hours with her over 2 days and reviewed every recording of her jail visits and calls. My mom had her first panic attack 3 weeks later in a grocery store when a stranger walked up and asked if she was the mother from the baby stealing story. She dropped her basket and sat shaking in the car for 20 minutes before she could drive. My dad found her that night crying in the dark kitchen, saying she could not face people anymore. The doctor started her on anxiety medication after she described waking at 3 in the morning with her heart slamming, sure she could not breathe. The pills made her exhausted all the time, and she stopped going to her walking club and her church group. Meanwhile, Yolanda kept meeting with Nadia and her brother Ronnie, who had stuck around after the news broke. Ronnie had been clean 2 years and did construction, but he wanted to make up for the years he had missed. Yolanda introduced him to her husband, Corbin Reyes, who ran a security company and needed dependable men for overnight shifts at the office parks. Ronnie took the job and moved into a small unit near Nadia so he could watch the baby while she went to class. My wife passed the halfway mark of her 100 hours and came home talking about a kid named Tobias, who reminded her of herself at that age. The center had her running basic conflict drills, but mostly she just sat and listened to the kids talk about what home was like. The lead counselor noticed the change in her too and started having her help settle the newer kids who were still all sharp edges. The second psychiatric evaluation came back saying my sister was competent to stand trial, but carried narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. The psychiatrist wrote that she understood right from wrong perfectly well, but believed her own wants outranked anyone else's rights. She recommended at least 5 years of intensive treatment, whether or not my sister went to prison. My dad went back to work after 2 weeks off but came home early on his first day because he could not stand the way his crew looked at him. His supervisor offered him early retirement with full benefits after 29 years, and my dad started to seriously consider taking it. That weekend, I was clearing out our garage and found a box of my sister's things from when she stayed with us last winter. Inside were printed articles about private adoption and infants placed with wealthy couples for $50,000 or more. There were notes in her handwriting about how to forge relinquishment papers and which agencies asked the fewest questions. She had bookmarked news stories about people who got caught and highlighted exactly where they had slipped up. The prosecutor added the whole box to the file and said it proved premeditation and that the plan could have ended in trafficking. My wife's anger management instructor was an older man named Dale, who had been a Marine and then a patrol officer before he started counseling. Dale began meeting with her one-on-one after the group broke up to talk about the line between protecting people and attacking them. He had her write out exactly what she was feeling in the second before she threw the punch and what other choices she could have made. They ran through scenarios where she had to practice talking a situation down, even when she knew for certain something wrong was happening. The prosecutor called me 2 months after the arrest to lay out a plea deal she was offering my sister, 16 years with a chance at parole after 8 if she completed treatment and showed real remorse. The alternative was trial, where a conviction on all counts could bring 25 to life. Nadia got accepted into a bridge program for young mothers that included free childcare during class. The program ran 3 evenings a week plus Saturday mornings at the community college. Ronnie shifted his overnight schedule so he could take the baby while Nadia was in class, and Yolanda helped them build a routine. Nadia was determined to finish the bridge program and start the surgical tech track the next year. The baby was hitting every milestone, and Nadia sent us a photo of him smiling for the first time. My sister's court-appointed backup attorney presented the plea over a video call from the jail, but she started shouting before he finished the first sentence. She said she would never take a deal because she had done nothing wrong, and any jury would see she was rescuing a child from an unfit teenager. He tried to explain that the evidence was overwhelming, and she fired him on the spot and said she would find someone who actually believed her. The judge appointed yet another attorney, and my sister refused to meet with him and filed to represent herself again. The guards reported she had stopped taking the medication they had prescribed and was spending all day in the law library reading cases where people had beaten kidnapping charges. She wrote letters to anyone who would read them, insisting she was being persecuted for loving a child too much. The family therapist had us in a circle every Tuesday in an office that smelled like old paper and cold coffee. She pulled out a long timeline on a whiteboard and started marking the dates my sister had lied about things we had all buried. There was the time 2 years ago when she told us she had lost a baby at 20 weeks, and the whole family grieved and held a small service around an urn, until a funeral director later told my dad the urn had come back to him empty because there had never been any remains. The therapist kept adding lies to the board, like the semester my sister swore she was in nursing school when she was actually working nights at a gas station. My mom cried through most of it, remembering how my sister sister used to stop dead in front of pregnant strangers and ask to touch their bellies. The therapist said we had all been in denial for years because admitting the truth meant admitting someone we loved was capable of terrible things. My wife finished her last day of community service on a Thursday, and the kids threw her a little party with cookies they had baked in the center kitchen. A boy named Tobias handed her a letter he had written about how her story helped him understand why he got so angry at his stepfather. The letter said he was learning to count to 10 and walk out of the room instead of throwing something. 3 other kids wrote notes too, and my wife folded them all into her wallet. The director asked if she would come back as a volunteer to coach the center's basketball team. The prosecutor called us into her office downtown, where the walls were covered in framed degrees and photos of her kids. She spread the case files across a long table and told us the trial would start in 3 months. My sister was planning to represent herself and argue she had been doing a public service by targeting a girl she called an unfit mother. The prosecutor showed us motions my sister had already filed claiming Nadia used drugs, even though every test Nadia took came back clean. She warned us my sister would try to paint herself as a rescuer, saving a baby from neglect. My parents met with a real estate agent about the lake cabin where our family had spent every summer of my childhood. They had owned it 22 years and fixed it up with their own hands, but now they needed the money to pay back everyone my sister had scammed. My uncle got $2,000 back and my aunts each got their share too. My grandmother refused to take a cent, saying she only wanted my sister to get help and never hurt another family. The cabin sold in 3 weeks to a young couple with 2 kids. I was picking through apples at the grocery store when I heard a baby fuss and turned to see Nadia pushing a cart with her son in the seat. Ronnie was beside her comparing formula prices on his phone. The baby had round cheeks and was wearing a onesie that said little brother, even though he did not have one. The way the family kept turning up old lies from years back makes me wonder if some of them had chosen not to look. That empty urn we all cried over. How did nobody question it until my dad happened to call the funeral home? Nadia looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, but she was smiling and pulling faces to make the baby laugh. She spotted me and froze for a second before Ronnie put a hand on her shoulder and said something quiet to her. We talked for a few minutes about how the baby was finally sleeping through the night and how she was taking her classes online. The baby grabbed my finger when I reached down and had the strongest grip for someone so small. Letters started landing in relatives' mailboxes with my sister's inmate number in the corner. She wrote to my aunt claiming I had always been jealous of her and had turned my wife against her. She told my cousins that my wife was violent and unstable and that they should keep their kids far away from her. Most of the family threw the letters out or sent them back sealed, but my dad's brother called asking whether maybe we had all overreacted. My mom had to walk him through the evidence again, the receipts for the bellies and the surveillance photos and the notebooks. My sister even wrote to our old neighbors claiming she was wrongly locked up for caring too much about children's welfare. The prosecutor obtained recordings of my sister's jail calls through a court order. We sat in her office and listened to my sister tell another inmate she was going to get her baby the second she got out. She called Nadia a worthless junkie who did not deserve to be a mother, even though Nadia had never touched a drug in her life. On one call, my sister said she knew where Nadia was living now and that she would wait as long as it took. The prosecutor said the calls proved my sister was still dangerous and showed zero remorse, and she planned to play them for the jury. The guards had also found drawings of infants my sister had made all over her cell walls during a search. My wife and I spent a month driving through different neighborhoods looking at houses. Ours had reporters idling out front and strangers slowing down to photograph the yard where the gender reveal had happened. The neighbors were polite, but we could feel how uncomfortable they were near us. We found a place 45 minutes out in a quiet town where nobody knew our name. The movers came on a Saturday and we packed everything without once looking at the corner of the yard where the dessert table had stood. My grandmother finally agreed to give a statement to the prosecutor after months of silence. She was too frail to come in, so they set up a video call from her living room. She sat in her good chair in her Sunday dress and told the prosecutor about handing my sister $6,000 for vitamins and maternity clothes. Her hands trembled as she held up bank statements and canceled checks to the camera. She said my sister had come to her crying about medical bills and needing help to give the baby the best possible start. When the prosecutor asked if she wanted the money returned, my grandmother said she only wanted my sister to get well and never do this to anyone again. Nadia brought her son to the prosecutor's office for a meeting about the trial, and I was there too. The baby was 6 months old now, sitting up on his own and starting on mashed sweet potato. Yolanda came with them and told us Nadia had not missed a single parenting class or a single pediatric appointment. The boy was in the top range for his weight and had rolled over early and was already fighting to crawl. Yolanda said that in 20 years of casework, she had rarely seen a young mother this devoted. Nadia studied for her exams every night after the baby was down, and Ronnie was picking up overtime to cover daycare. The prosecutor took photos of the healthy, laughing baby to show the jury exactly what my sister had planned to take. A week before jury selection, the prosecutor called me with one more thing they had pulled from the prepaid phone in the storage unit. My sister had recorded voice memos to herself, dozens of them, practicing the story she would tell us the day she came home with the baby. In one, she rehearsed crying and saying the labor labor had come fast and the birth suite had let her leave early. In another, she practiced the exact wording of how she would explain that she had chosen not to have any of us in the delivery room because she wanted the moment to be private. She had scripted her own reactions weeks in advance, when she would let herself cry, when she would laugh, how she would hand the baby to our mother first because that would make it hardest for anyone to doubt her. The prosecutor said in all her years, she had rarely seen a plan rehearsed down to the tone of voice, like a person memorizing lines for a play. I sat in my car in the parking lot after that call and could not turn the key for a long time because I kept thinking about how easily it would have worked. If my wife had not followed her, if she had trusted the story the way the rest of us did, my sister would have walked through my parents' door with a stolen newborn and we would have thrown her a welcome home dinner. We would have held that baby and cried and never once thought to ask whose child we were passing around the table. 3 months later, I walked into the courthouse for jury selection and saw my sister for the first time since the arrest. She had lost at least 35 pounds and her cheekbones stood out sharp under skin that looked like paper. The jail uniform hung off her frame and her hair lay flat instead of the styled curls she had always kept up. She kept telling her standby attorney she did not need to be there, and the judge made her sit down 4 separate times before threatening to have her restrained. The prosecutor asked each potential juror whether they could be fair to someone accused of planning to steal a newborn. My sister sat there shaking her head and mouthing the word no every time a juror said they could be impartial. We had 12 jurors and 2 alternates seated by lunch, and my sister told the judge every one of them was a fool. The next morning, opening statements began, and my sister interrupted the prosecutor 6 times in the first 10 minutes. She stood up insisting the prosecutor did not understand she was helping society by taking a baby from an unfit girl. The judge warned her twice and then said one more outburst meant contempt and removal. My sister sat back but kept shaking her head and making faces while the prosecutor showed the jury the prosthetic and the surveillance photos. When her standby attorney tried to give an opening on her behalf, she kept lunging for the microphone. 2 days later, I took the stand at 8 in the morning and did not step down until after 2 in the afternoon. The prosecutor walked me through finding the dented belly at the party and everything my wife had gathered. I described pressing my hand into the foam where my niece was supposed to be and hearing my sister say the teenager did not deserve her own child. My sister stared at me for the entire 6 hours without once blinking or looking away. Her standby attorney asked if I had ever seen signs of mental illness before, and I had to say no, though looking back there were things we had all ignored. The prosecutor put up the receipts for the bellies and the photos of my sister trailing Nadia through the hospital. I identified my sister's handwriting on the notebook pages about Nadia's schedule and confirmed the credit card she had opened in my name. When I finally stepped down, my legs were shaking so hard I nearly went down on the courtroom floor. The next morning, Nadia took the stand holding her son, who was almost 9 months old now. She described meeting my sister at the Young Mothers group and how my sister always sat one seat over and asked personal questions. Her voice cracked when she talked about learning that someone had planned to steal her baby on the very day she gave birth. She said she still had not slept a full night and still checked her locks 5 times before bed. 3 of the jurors were wiping their eyes as Nadia described being 17 and alone and thinking my sister was being kind when she was really being hunted. The baby started crying during her testimony and Nadia bounced him while she explained how my sister had learned her induction date and her ward schedule. My sister's standby attorney did not ask Nadia a single question and my sister slammed both hands on the table. My wife testified the next afternoon about following my sister to the sports bar on the day she claimed to have a growth scan. She admitted plainly that throwing the punch was wrong and that she had already served her sentence for it, but she explained she could not stand there and let a newborn be stolen, and she knew no officer would believe her without proof in hand. She showed the jury the surveillance photos she had saved of my sister circling Nadia for 2 months. My sister's standby attorney asked if my wife had enjoyed hitting a pregnant woman, and my wife said no, but that she would do it again to stop a baby from being taken. The jury was out for only 3 hours, which our lawyer said was remarkably fast for a case this serious. They came back with guilty verdicts on all 7 counts, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping and fraud over $10,000. My sister shot to her feet screaming that they were all idiots who could not see she was trying to give that baby a better life. 2 bailiffs had to drag her out of the courtroom while she kept shrieking that Nadia was garbage who would ruin her own son. 2 weeks later at sentencing, the judge gave my sister 19 years with a chance at parole in 10 if she completed psychiatric treatment. My sister laughed out loud and said she would rather serve every day of the 19 than stand there and pretend she had been wrong. The judge said that was her choice, but that she would be transferred to a secure psychiatric facility regardless. And then she asked Nadia if she wanted to say anything before the court. Nadia stood up with her son on her hip and looked straight at my sister and said only that he was hers, that he had always been hers, and that no cage was far enough away. The bailiffs took my sister by the arms, and as they pulled her toward the door, she twisted around to find Nadia one last time and said, calm as anything, that she would be counting the days until that boy was old enough to come find his real mother. Nadia did not flinch. She just tightened her arms around her son and turned her back, and I looked at my my wife 2 rows away, the woman I had called sick and jealous with a smashed cake at our feet 7 months ago, and I finally understood that the punch everyone filmed had been the only thing standing between that sleeping baby and a stranger who had already bought his car seat.